I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It started on an ordinary Thursday morning, the kind that drifts by without meaning until it doesn't. I remember the reflection in the bathroom mirror that day, how it caught me at an odd angle. The light from the window fell softly over my cheek, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw someone else looking back. Softer eyes. A different kind of calm. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the same tired face I'd seen for years, mine. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last time I would see myself the same way. For months, maybe years, I'd been stuck in a fog, waking up, going to work, eating, pretending. Pretending I was comfortable in my skin, pretending that the quiet restlessness was just stress, pretending that I didn't sometimes feel like I was standing outside of my own life, watching someone else live it. People said I had everything together, decent job, clean apartment, polite smile. But they never noticed how much effort it took to keep that version of me standing upright. Then came the pill. It wasn't anything illegal or dramatic. Just something I found online, a supplement that claimed to enhance emotional sensitivity. I wasn't even sure why I bought it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe loneliness. The reviews were strange. It made me understand myself in ways I can't explain. I felt seen for the first time. Be careful. This changes you. At the time, I laughed. Sure, I muttered, tossing the bottle into my drawer. But something about those words lingered in my mind like a whisper. Be careful. This changes you. It sat unopened for weeks. Until one night, after another hollow day at the office, I found myself holding that bottle again. The light in my room was dim, the kind that makes shadows look alive. I stared at it, reading the label over and over, as if the words might suddenly make sense. Empathica, it said, in gentle silver font. A natural supplement for emotional clarity and inner alignment. Inner alignment. I took one pill. Just one. It had no taste, no smell, nothing special about it, except how quickly I felt different. Not dizzy. Not high. Just present. My thoughts didn't feel like static anymore. My heart felt like it had turned up its volume, every beat pulsing with a strange warmth that moved through my chest and down to my fingertips. I remember looking at my hands, turning them over under the light, and feeling like they didn't quite belong to me. They looked thinner somehow, the veins less sharp, the skin almost softer. I told myself it was imagination. But that night, when I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. My body felt too awake. My emotions hummed just beneath the surface, like an orchestra tuning before a song begins. I thought about my life, about the years I'd spent suppressing whatever this was that stirred inside me, about the way I'd always looked at the world, quietly wishing I could move through it with more grace, more gentleness, more authenticity. At some point, I must have drifted into a half-dream. I remember standing in front of a mirror again, only this time the reflection wasn't mine. The figure had my eyes, but everything else was different, softer, more radiant, the kind of beauty that felt alive from the inside. The reflection smiled at me, but her eyes were full of sadness. "You've been waiting for me," she whispered. I woke up crying. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it was just an emotional dream. But when I walked past the bathroom mirror, something stopped me cold. My jaw looked subtly different, less rigid. My skin had a faint glow to it that I couldn't explain. Even my posture felt lighter, like gravity had loosened its grip on me. I didn't panic. Not right away. I told myself it must have been lighting, hydration, sleep, anything logical. But then it kept happening, little changes, small enough to deny, big enough to notice. The way I moved. The way I felt when people looked at me. I caught myself smiling more easily, my voice softening when I spoke. By the fourth day, I felt like I was living inside a quiet miracle or a beautiful mistake. When I went to work, people started treating me differently. "You look refreshed," my coworker Jenna said, tilting her head like she couldn't quite figure it out. "Did you change something?" "No," I lied. But her eyes lingered on me longer than usual, as if she saw something beneath the surface that I didn't understand yet. By the end of that week, my world began to shift in ways I couldn't control. My emotions deepened. Everything felt stronger, clearer, more vivid. Music brought tears to my eyes. Random kindness from strangers filled me with warmth. Even small frustrations, like a spilled coffee or a harsh tone, cut deeper than before. And then, one night, as I stood before the mirror brushing my hair, I realized I'd been running my fingers through it for several minutes, because it looked longer. Not by much, but enough to notice. Enough to make me whisper, "What's happening to me?" That question became my shadow. Each day, I woke up slightly different. My features softened. My clothes felt subtly ill-fitting, though I hadn't changed weight. My reflection, once sharp, tired, masculine, was melting into something more delicate. Something that didn't frighten me as much as it should have. Because deep down, beneath the confusion, I felt right. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel like I was pretending. Still, I told no one. Who would believe me? A pill changed me? Ridiculous. And yet, every reflection told the same story, slowly, steadily. I was transforming. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, inwardly. It was like all the walls I'd built between who I was and who I might have been were dissolving one by one. The day I almost told someone was the day I ran into an old friend, Ethan. We'd known each other since college, shared countless nights of laughter, bad takeout, and mutual confusion about life. He took one look at me and froze. "Wow," he said, blinking. "You look different." "Do I?" I asked, forcing a laugh. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Not just different, lighter somehow. Happier." He tilted his head. "You doing okay?" That question nearly broke me. Because the truth was, no, I wasn't okay. I was terrified and elated and confused and alive all at once. But how could I tell him that a simple supplement had started unraveling the seams of who I thought I was? That I was beginning to feel comfortable in a body that no longer looked quite like the one I'd known for years? So I just smiled and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." That night, I stared at my reflection again, my hands trembling as I touched my face. The person looking back was still me, but a different version of me. My lips looked fuller, my expression softer, and behind my eyes, I could see something new flickering, an emerging truth that frightened and comforted me at the same time. And for the first time, I whispered it aloud. "I think I'm changing into her." The sound of those words made my heart race. It wasn't a declaration. It was an acknowledgement. Like meeting a friend I'd been avoiding for years. I didn't know what her meant yet. All I knew was that when I said it, I felt peaceful. Over the next few days, the transformation became impossible to ignore. My skin felt sensitive to textures. My emotions swayed with subtle grace. My clothes fit differently. I caught myself moving with gestures I'd never practiced, but somehow knew. It was like the person inside me had been learning to move through me all along, and now she was finally free to take over. And yet, the scariest part wasn't the change itself, it was how natural it felt. The days after that first whisper, "I think I'm changing into her," were surreal. I began noticing subtle things that no one else might catch, like the way my shadow on the wall seemed softer, less rigid, as if it were stretching itself toward a different shape. My reflection became a stranger and a friend at the same time, a delicate reminder of the self I had been too afraid to imagine. Some mornings, I woke up half expecting to see my old face staring back at me, but instead, it was her. And she smiled. At work, the changes were harder to hide. I caught my coworkers glancing at me in ways that made me self-conscious. I felt eyes on me in the elevator, on the stairs, in the break room. But it wasn't the judgmental kind of attention I feared. It was curious, gentle, intrigued. And it unnerved me. I wasn't used to being seen, really seen. The transformation wasn't just in my body. It seeped into my mind, my thoughts, my heart. I noticed how much softer I had become, how my words carried more empathy than before. Conversations that once bored me now seemed full of nuance. I laughed more easily, cried more often, and felt the rhythm of the world in ways I couldn't name. It was intoxicating, but also terrifying. One evening, I stood in my apartment, staring at my reflection in the living room window. Outside, the city lights flickered, but inside, I felt as if the whole room had gone still. My hair had grown longer than I realized, brushing my collarbone, catching the light in delicate strands. My jawline had softened. My shoulders, once broad and stubborn, seemed lighter, less defined. I touched my cheeks and felt the warmth of new contours forming. I barely recognized the face in the reflection, and yet it was the only face that felt like home. It wasn't just physical. The way I carried myself had changed. My movements, my gestures, even the way I breathed, smaller, more considered, more fluid. I started experimenting with clothes I never imagined wearing: soft sweaters, flowing scarves, gentle fabrics that brushed my skin in unfamiliar ways. I felt almost guilty enjoying it, like indulging in a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Curiosity drove me further. I began studying myself obsessively, drawing diagrams in my mind, noting the progression. My features were subtle, ever-shifting, like a sculpture that sculpted itself. But the strangest part wasn't the change. It was how natural it felt, as if my body had been waiting decades to move toward this form. Then came the first test. I went out one evening to run a simple errand: groceries, a few items. I wore a soft blouse and a cardigan, something casual. I wasn't trying to pass or hide. I just wanted to move in comfort. But the moment I walked outside, the world looked different. People's gazes lingered. A stranger smiled at me in a way that made my heart jump. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a shop window, and my breath caught. The person staring back was undeniably feminine. Not exaggerated, not artificial, just her. And she radiated confidence I didn't remember having. On the subway, it became worse. Worse in the best way. The seat across from me was empty at first, but then a woman sat down and gave me a soft, approving smile. It made me blush, my heartbeat loud in my chest. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. There was a curious pride, a sense of finally being aligned with myself that made me tremble. That night, I returned home, feeling raw and unsteady. I stripped off my clothes, dropped onto the bed, and stared at the ceiling. My emotions were like a storm breaking open. Relief, exhilaration, fear, joy, they all collided, overwhelming me. I whispered her name quietly, as if saying it aloud might anchor me. Lila. The name felt right. Fluid, soft, comforting. It didn't matter that no one else knew it yet. It mattered that I knew. The next morning, I found a note in my drawer. Not handwritten, typed. I didn't remember leaving it. The words were simple. You're changing. Embrace her, but be careful. My heart raced. Was it a prank? A glitch in my memory? Or a sign that whatever this pill had done was more than temporary? I felt both thrilled and frightened. My reflection in the mirror seemed to shimmer with anticipation, as if she were nudging me forward. At work, things became more complicated. I started receiving curious compliments that I couldn't easily deflect. You seem different, someone said. Radiant, another whispered. I laughed nervously, but each comment cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, the truth, but I was trapped by fear and disbelief. How could I explain that a pill had allowed me to access this version of myself, to step into a life I'd only imagined in fleeting dreams? Then came the emotional turning point. Late one night, I was scrolling through my phone when I stumbled across old photos of me from years ago, rigid, tense, uncomfortable in my own skin. My chest tightened. I realized how much I'd been hiding, how much I'd denied myself. And tears came, not from sadness, but from recognition, from relief. I was finally moving toward something I'd always been afraid to face: authenticity. By the next week, I was experimenting more boldly. Hair accessories, scarves, delicate earrings, small touches that felt like personal affirmations. Each day, the reflection in the mirror shifted, becoming more expressive, more alive, more undeniably her. The sensation was electric, like discovering a secret room in a familiar house that you didn't know existed. And yet, fear lingered. What if this wasn't permanent? What if I woke up one morning and everything reverted? What if people rejected me, friends, family, colleagues, because I had dared to explore who I truly
was?
The fear was sharp, like a knife twisting in my chest. But alongside it came a thrill I had never felt. For the first time, I realized that fear and desire could coexist, that uncertainty could carry beauty instead of despair. The transformation wasn't just about appearance, it was about being brave enough to acknowledge a truth I'd long ignored. Every step, every shift, every flutter of change felt like crossing a river I had been too afraid to enter. And with each crossing, I felt her, Lila, becoming more real, more vivid, more undeniable. The pill had opened the door. I was walking through it. The days blurred together as Lila, began asserting herself in ways I never imagined. The mirror had become my confidant, my witness, my anchor in the storm of transformation. Every glance, every brush of hair across my shoulder reminded me that I was stepping into a life that felt mine for the first time. And yet, stepping into this life meant stepping out of the shadows I'd carefully maintained for years. The first challenge came at work, and it was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. People noticed small things, the softer cadence of my voice, the gentle curves of my hands, the lightness in my gait. Some smiled. Some paused mid-conversation, trying to reconcile the before with the after. I felt their scrutiny like a physical pressure against my skin. I could almost hear their thoughts, their confusion, their curiosity. One day, during a team meeting, someone made a comment. "You look really different today," said Mark, one of the more reserved colleagues. There was no malice in his tone, but a hint of hesitation, like he didn't know whether to celebrate or retreat. My heart leapt into my throat. For a moment, I wanted to run, hide behind the version of me that had survived by blending in. But instead, I smiled, just enough to reassure him, and maybe myself. "It's a change," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air like a fragile bridge between who I had been and who I was becoming. After the meeting, I retreated to the bathroom, staring at my reflection. Lila's face was softer than mine had ever been, yes, but her eyes carried something stronger, courage I hadn't recognized in myself before. I touched my cheek, tracing the curve that had emerged over the past weeks, and whispered, "We can do this." The social world, I realized, was a minefield of tiny judgments. Every interaction felt like a test. Every smile or sideways glance could unravel the fragile confidence I was building. And yet, amidst the tension, there were moments of unexpected connection. Strangers on the street offered compliments. Friends noticed my warmth, my attentiveness. Even the barista at my favorite cafe paused, studying me with a soft smile, as if recognizing a story I hadn't yet told aloud. One evening, I met a friend for dinner, Daniel, someone I'd known casually for years. The moment he saw me, his eyes widened, and I could feel the unspoken question hovering in the air. "What's changed?" "Wow," he said, voice catching slightly. You look amazing." The words made my chest swell and ache simultaneously. I laughed nervously, unsure how to navigate the space between honesty and concealment. "Thanks," I murmured. "I'm feeling different, I guess." Daniel tilted his head, curiosity softening his expression. "Different good or different? "Different good," I said quickly, hoping my tone carried conviction. "It's a long story." And it was. A story about pills and reflections, about fear and longing, about discovering a self that had been waiting silently for years. A story I wasn't ready to share. That night, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself to explore further. I tried outfits I never imagined wearing, fabrics that caressed rather than constricted. Scarves, soft sweaters, delicate blouses, each one a whisper of identity, a tactile affirmation of Lila's presence. My movements became deliberate, measured, almost ceremonial. Every gesture, every glance in the mirror was a declaration: I exist, and I am becoming. But the transformation wasn't without its inner turmoil. Every night, I wrestled with fear. Fear of exposure, fear of rejection, fear of losing control. My mind became a battlefield, torn between the comfort of hiding and the exhilaration of being seen. I would lie awake, tracing the shape of my face with trembling fingers, whispering fragments of dialogue. Am I enough? Will anyone accept me? What if this isn't permanent? Then came the first truly shocking moment. I was on a quiet street, walking home after a long day. The city was draped in the gold of streetlights, the air crisp with autumn chill. I paused to check my reflection in a shop window, and froze. The woman staring back was unmistakably Lila, but her eyes weren't just soft, they were piercing, as if she was confronting me, testing me. I realized then that I had been coexisting with her, allowing her small presence to guide me, but now she was claiming the space entirely. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt fear, yes, but also a strange exhilaration. This is real, I whispered aloud. This is me. That night, I journaled obsessively. I wrote every sensation, every change, every fleeting emotion. I wanted to capture it all before it slipped through my fingers, before the world forced me back into old roles and expectations. I wrote about the warmth in my chest, the tingling in my fingertips, the sense of fluidity in my body I had never felt before. I wrote about fear and joy, confusion and clarity, the delicate tension between uncertainty and self-acceptance. And then came a subtle twist I hadn't anticipated. I began noticing small physical responses that were impossible to ignore. My posture, my gestures, my facial expressions, each one adapting instinctively to the self I was becoming. A stranger in a cafe commented on my grace, and I realized with awe that grace wasn't something I had learned. It had emerged naturally, a reflection of Lila's essence asserting itself. The more I embraced these changes, the stronger they became. My reflections smiled with confidence I had never dared to claim. My movements flowed like water, deliberate yet effortless. And yet, the fear lingered, lurking in the corners of my mind. Would I ever be able to merge the life I had with the life I was becoming? Could I navigate the delicate web of social expectations while honoring the truth that now pulsed through my veins? The answer, I sensed, would not come easily. And then, in the quiet of one particularly still night, I had a revelation. Standing before the mirror, brushing my hair in soft, deliberate strokes, I realized that transformation isn't just physical. It is emotional, psychological, spiritual. It is not simply becoming Lila. It is allowing Lila to exist fully within me, to inhabit every thought, every gesture, every moment. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. A whisper of a smile tugged at my lips. We are here. We are real. And we are not afraid. The morning after that quiet revelation, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I had been living this transformation in the shadows for weeks, exploring the edges of who I was becoming, but today felt different. Today, I would leave the apartment with no mask, no hesitation, carrying Lila fully into the world. I dressed carefully, each choice deliberate, a soft blouse in cream, a lightweight scarf, a skirt that swayed with every step. For the first time, I felt like my body and my mind were aligned. The mirror didn't show me a reflection anymore. It showed a presence, a person who existed fully and unapologetically. Lila had become tangible, undeniable, and I could no longer hide her. The streets were bustling with the usual chaos of the city, and I felt exposed in a way I hadn't before. Every glance from strangers was amplified, every whisper imagined as judgment. But beneath the fear, there was an electric thrill, like standing on the edge of a cliff and feeling both the terror and the exhilaration of flight. My first challenge came at a cafe, a place I had frequented countless times as my old self. I ordered my coffee and waited, and for a moment, the barista's eyes flicked over me, a curious pause in her otherwise automatic routine. She smiled politely, but I could feel the subtle shift in attention around me. A few other patrons glanced in my direction, whispers brushing against the edges of my awareness. I felt my chest tighten. This was the real test, the world seeing me as Lila. And then something surprising happened. A woman at the table across from me caught my reflection in the window and gave me a warm, approving smile. No words, just recognition, acknowledgement. My breath caught in my throat. It was subtle, but it was enough. Enough to make me realize that being seen like this wasn't dangerous. It was liberating. Yet liberation is rarely without conflict. Later that day, walking to the subway, I passed a man whose gaze lingered with a mix of curiosity and judgment. His eyes seemed to search for answers in my expression, and I felt the familiar rush of vulnerability that had accompanied each change. My hands trembled slightly at my sides, and for a fleeting second, I wished I could shrink into invisibility. But I didn't. Instead, I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked past him with deliberate grace. I wasn't hiding anymore. Lila existed now, fully and irrevocably, and she demanded acknowledgement, not just from others but from me. At work, I faced subtler challenges. Some colleagues struggled to reconcile this new presence with the version of me they had always known. A few were supportive, offering compliments or soft smiles, but others grew distant, cautious, unsure how to interact with someone so visibly different yet still unmistakably me. The tension was palpable, and I realized that transformation wasn't just about physical change. It was about navigating the emotional currents that ripple through every social interaction. One evening, I attended a small gathering of friends. I had debated whether to go, worried about questions, whispered judgments, or awkward silences. But I decided to show up fully as Lila. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt a mix of dread and exhilaration, every heartbeat amplifying the stakes. Conversations flowed around me, but I felt a subtle shift in the room. Some friends hesitated at first, unsure how to address the new me. But as the night unfolded, laughter returned, gentle curiosity softened into genuine connection, and I felt the first true acceptance that wasn't confined to mirrors or private reflections. Lila was beginning to exist in the shared spaces of my life, not just the hidden corners of my apartment. Still, doubt lingered. Walking home later that night, I reflected on the delicate balance between who I was and who I was becoming. Transformation wasn't a destination, it was a continuous journey, a series of moments strung together like fragile glass beads, each one demanding care, attention, courage. I realized that living authentically required bravery far beyond anything I had anticipated, not just in showing the world who I was, but in accepting myself fully, without compromise. That night, I stared at the ceiling, feeling the quiet thrum of life in my veins. Every heartbeat echoed the same truth. Lila was real. I was real. And the world, in all its complexity, would have to reckon with that reality. The next morning brought a new challenge, a confrontation that forced me to test the boundaries of self-acceptance and courage. I was walking through a crowded street when someone I hadn't seen in years, an old acquaintance, spotted me. Recognition flashed in their eyes, followed by confusion, hesitation, a question unspoken but palpable. "Who are you now?" I felt my pulse quicken. The moment demanded honesty, composure, authenticity. I smiled softly, meeting their gaze with calm confidence. "I'm me," I said simply. And for the first time, I realized that the answer wasn't about explanation or justification. It was about owning the truth of my transformation, about existing in the world fully as Lila, without apology or fear. As I walked away, the city felt different. The streets, the lights, the people. They were no longer merely a backdrop to my life. They were part of the journey, part of the story unfolding in real time. Every glance, every whisper, every small interaction became a reflection of courage, vulnerability, and the delicate power of self-acceptance. By the end of the week, I understood something crucial. Transformation is not a solitary act. It is an ongoing dialogue with the world, a negotiation between fear and authenticity, a practice in patience, empathy, and unwavering self-recognition. Lila was not just a reflection in the mirror. She was a force, a presence, a life lived fully in alignment with the deepest truths I had long suppressed. And yet, As real and tangible as Lila had become, a shadow of doubt persisted. I knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of fear, moments of confrontation, moments that demanded courage I didn't yet know I possessed. But for the first time, I felt prepared. Because Lila was no longer just a secret or a fleeting reflection. She was me, fully, irrevocably, beautifully. The morning light poured through the curtains in golden streaks, and for a moment, I just sat on the edge of the bed, breathing in the quiet. Lila was no longer a fleeting whisper in my mind. She was tangible, pulsing through my veins, shaping my movements, my thoughts, my very sense of being. I could feel her in every breath, every flicker of emotion, every subtle shift in posture. And yet, with that presence came a new challenge: ownership. How fully could I step into her world without fear? How completely could I abandon the protective walls I had spent decades constructing? I decided to experiment. Not just with clothes, but with gestures, expressions, even the cadence of my voice. I hummed softly while making coffee, noting how the sound lingered in the kitchen, how it softened the space. I allowed my hands to move freely while arranging flowers on the windowsill, admiring the delicate curve of each stem, the way it caught the sunlight. Small acts, almost imperceptible, but intensely satisfying. Lila was learning the rhythm of life, and I was learning with her. But the world outside remained unpredictable. At work, subtle glances and double takes continued, some approving, some hesitant. I realized that not everyone would immediately understand or accept the shift unfolding in me. And yet, I found solace in moments of quiet connection, a colleague who noticed my laughter carrying more warmth, a friend who complimented my sense of style, a stranger who offered a brief, genuine smile. These fragments of recognition became threads, weaving Lila into the fabric of daily life. Then came the turning point. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, the city streets slick with reflective light. I had chosen an outfit that felt daring, a soft, flowing dress paired with a tailored jacket. Every step I took through the puddled streets was deliberate, each movement a conscious act of presence. I passed a small park and paused, drawn to the sight of children playing, their laughter sharp and clear against the soft drizzle. Something inside me stirred, a longing for openness, for simplicity, for a world where identity was fluid and free. And then I saw her. Not Lila in the mirror. Not the reflection I had been nurturing in private. But a stranger, a woman standing beneath the canopy of a tree, her expression open, unguarded, her presence luminous. She looked at me and smiled, a smile that held no judgment, no hesitation, only recognition. And in that moment, I understood something profound. The transformation was no longer mine alone. It was part of a continuum, a shared experience that transcended the private confines of reflection. Lila was real because the world could see her, and more importantly, because I could let her be seen. The rain thickened, and I felt a tremor of fear. What if this openness made me vulnerable? What if exposure brought ridicule or rejection? But then I remembered the pill, the subtle catalyst that had opened the door, and the months of private exploration that had followed. I realized that vulnerability was not weakness, it was proof of existence. Proof that Lila and I were alive, authentic, and uncompromising. Later that evening, I returned home and sat before the mirror for a long, uninterrupted moment. I traced the contours of my face, the gentle curves that had emerged, the softness around the eyes, the fullness of my lips. Every detail told a story of growth, of surrender, of courage. And I whispered her name, softly, reverently, Lila. The whisper evolved into a statement, steady and resolute. We are here. We are real. And we will not retreat. That night, I wrote in my journal with a fervor I hadn't experienced in years. I documented every sensation, every flicker of emotion, every subtle transformation. I wrote about fear and exhilaration, vulnerability and strength, doubt and clarity. I explored questions that had lingered in the shadows of my mind. Who am I? Who am I becoming? How do I balance authenticity with the expectations of the world? And as the ink flowed across the page, I realized that the answers were less important than the act of asking. Transformation, I understood, is not a destination. It is a continuous dialogue with oneself and with the world. It is the courage to move forward, even when the path is uncertain. It is the willingness to embrace discomfort as a catalyst for growth. The following days were marked by subtle triumphs. I walked through crowded streets without flinching at the gazes of strangers. I experimented with accessories, hairstyles, and clothing, each choice an affirmation of presence. I allowed myself to linger in mirrors, not to measure or critique, but to commune with the self I was cultivating. And yet, the journey was not linear. Doubts returned in quiet moments, shadows in the corners of my mind. What if this was fleeting? What if the changes were temporary? What if the world rejected Lila, and I was forced back into the confines of the person I had once been? But each time doubt crept in, I returned to the mirror, to the reflection that had become both guide and companion. Lila's eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. And I remembered that transformation is a process, not a single act. It is a dance of patience, courage, and relentless authenticity. The emotional turning point was complete. I no longer merely observed the changes, I inhabited them. I moved through the world as Lila, fully and unapologetically, aware of the risks but also of the profound beauty in vulnerability. The reflection was no longer a stranger. It was home. And for the first time in years, I felt complete. The weeks that followed marked the first time I truly felt Lila moving through the world, not just reflecting in mirrors or private moments. Each day became an experiment, a negotiation between self-expression and social perception, between courage and caution. The city seemed both larger and smaller at once. Larger because every glance, every whisper, every casual comment now felt amplified. Smaller because I was beginning to inhabit it fully, unafraid, unhidden. One morning, I decided to attend a small networking event at a coworker's art gallery. It was a space I had often walked past but never entered, a place brimming with unfamiliar faces, unspoken expectations, and subtle scrutiny. I dressed with intention, choosing a soft emerald dress and a cardigan that fell just right over my shoulders. I applied makeup sparingly, trusting that Lila's presence, her poise, her confidence, would speak louder than any cosmetic enhancement. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the eyes of strangers shift toward me. Some curious, some cautious, others openly admiring. I noticed the subtle adjustments, shoulders straightening, heads tilting, conversations pausing. Every detail reminded me that I was now visible in a way I hadn't been before, and that visibility carried weight. At first, I kept to the periphery, sipping my drink, observing, acclimating. But gradually, I allowed myself to move closer to the center, to engage, to laugh, to connect. And it worked. I found myself speaking with ease, expressing thoughts I had once suppressed, noticing the sparks of recognition in the eyes of those I met. Lila was not only inhabiting my body, she was inhabiting the room, claiming space that had always been denied to the version of me that hid behind conformity. Then came the first moment of resistance. A man, tall and brusque, approached me, his expression polite, but tinged with something unspoken, skepticism, perhaps discomfort. "You look different," he said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Did something happen? For a split second, panic rose. I felt the old urge to shrink, to blend back into shadows, to retreat to the safety of what I had always known. But then I remembered the months of private discovery, the mirror, the journal, the nights spent tracing Lila's emerging contours with reverent fingers. I drew a deep breath and smiled. "I'm just being me," I said calmly, letting the statement carry not defensiveness, but quiet authority. The man hesitated, then nodded slowly, as if testing the waters. "Right," he said, a faint smile softening his features. He moved on, leaving me with a surge of relief and triumph. It was a small victory, but a profound one. Lila had faced scrutiny and had not faltered. That night, Walking home through the drizzle of the city streets, I felt the weight of self-acceptance pressing against every step. The pill had been the spark, yes, but everything that followed, every gesture, every choice, every act of courage was mine. Lila was no longer a secret or an experiment. She was real, fully alive, and unyielding. The emotional growth deepened further when I reconnected with Daniel, the friend who had noticed the early changes. We met at a quiet cafe, and this time, there was no hesitation. I spoke freely about the journey, about the subtle yet profound shifts, about the discovery of a self I had long feared. He listened with quiet attentiveness, nodding, smiling, never interrupting, never judging. "You sound happy," he said finally. "I am," I admitted, a warmth spreading through my chest. "I feel aligned, finally." Daniel reached across the table, lightly touching my hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried an affirmation deeper than words. "I'm glad," he said. "You deserve to feel that way." It was in moments like these, moments of recognition, connection, acceptance, that Lila's transformation felt complete. Not just in form, but in presence, in social resonance, in emotional authenticity. Yet the journey was far from smooth. There were nights of doubt, when the reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar, when old fears whispered of regression, ridicule, or rejection. There were casual comments overheard in public, subtle glances that implied judgment, the invisible weight of societal expectation pressing against my spine. Each instance reminded me that being seen fully, unapologetically, was both a gift and a challenge. But Lila persisted. Every small triumph, walking through a crowded street without flinching, speaking her truth in conversation, embracing her reflection fully, became a thread, weaving together an identity that was no longer tentative but firm, resilient, and beautiful. One evening, after a particularly trying day at work, I returned home and collapsed into the armchair by the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass. I let myself rest there, reflecting on the journey so far. I traced the contours of my face in the reflection of the window, whispered Lila's name softly, and marveled at how far we had come. The transformation had begun with a pill, yes, but it had flourished through courage, patience, vulnerability, and a relentless pursuit of authenticity. And in that quiet, rain-drenched room, I realized something crucial. The world may not always understand, may not always accept, may even resist, but Lila was unstoppable. She existed, fully and unapologetically, and I would navigate every challenge, every subtle resistance, every unexpected twist, with a strength she had taught me to claim. The emotional journey, I understood, was far from over. But for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever came next with clarity, courage, and the full embrace of the person I had always been waiting to meet. It started with an email, a seemingly innocuous message from HR regarding a project I had been leading. At first glance, it appeared routine, but the tone carried an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. A colleague had questioned my decisions, subtly framing them as uncharacteristic and implying that my recent changes in appearance and demeanor were influencing my work. My chest tightened. For the first time, the transformation that had felt so liberating collided with real-world consequences. Lila was no longer just a reflection, no longer just a personal journey. It was now visible in a way that others were judging, scrutinizing, and challenging. I spent that afternoon pacing my apartment, staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to ground myself. Lila's eyes met mine with calm, steady reassurance. "We've come this far. Don't falter now." But even with her presence, doubt clawed at my thoughts. Could I navigate this without retreating? Could I assert my identity without being dismissed or belittled? The confrontation came the next morning. In the conference room, the colleague approached, voice measured but tinged with condescension. "I just don't understand the shift," they said. "It's different, and it's affecting the team." I felt the familiar rush of fear, that instinctive desire to shrink into invisibility. But then I remembered every small triumph, walking through crowded streets, embracing my reflection, standing fully as Lila in front of friends and strangers alike. I drew a deep breath, feeling the presence of the woman I had become. "I understand your concerns," I said, voice calm but firm. "But my approach is informed, deliberate, and aligned with the goals of the team. My appearance or personal expression doesn't diminish my capabilities. Lila and I are capable, professional, and committed." The words felt like a shield, not defensive, but assertive. My colleague paused, eyebrows raised, then nodded slowly. The tension didn't vanish completely, but the room shifted. I realized, in that moment, that asserting Lila publicly was not just about visibility, it was about claiming competence, presence, and respect. The emotional fallout, however, wasn't limited to that room. Walking home that evening, the weight of scrutiny pressed down on me. I questioned everything. Was I too bold? Too vulnerable? Would the world accept this fully formed version of myself, or would it always see me as different in a way I couldn't control? At home, I sank into the armchair by the window, rain streaking the glass. I traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my lips, the subtle softness that had emerged over weeks of transformation. Lila's gaze held me steady. "You are real. You are valid. You are enough." The emotional intensity of that confrontation lingered for days, forcing me to confront my own fears and insecurities. I journaled obsessively, documenting every feeling, every reaction, every doubt. I allowed myself to cry, not in shame, but in release, acknowledging the vulnerability that had accompanied every step of this journey. Then came a breakthrough. One evening, I decided to attend a small local meetup for people exploring gender expression and identity. It wasn't a group for romantic or sexual exploration, just a space for connection, understanding, and support. I arrived cautiously, unsure how my presence would be received, uncertain of the reactions I might encounter. But the reception was gentle, affirming, and transformative. Strangers greeted me with warmth, curiosity, and respect. Conversations flowed effortlessly, unburdened by judgment. For the first time, I felt the external reflection of Lila's existence in a community that truly understood. It was not just validation, it was liberation. I realized something profound. While mirrors and introspection had introduced Lila to the world within me, connection with others allowed her, and me, to exist fully in the world outside. Identity, I understood, was not solitary. It thrived in acknowledgement, in shared experience, in the courage to be seen and accepted. That night, walking home under the city lights, I felt a quiet, powerful surge of clarity. Lila was no longer a whisper, no longer a reflection. She was a presence, a force of authenticity, courage, and resilience. And though challenges remained, though scrutiny and resistance would inevitably arise, I now understood that I had the inner strength to navigate them. The confrontation had been a crucible, refining both Lila and me. Fear had been present, yes, but courage had won. Doubt had surfaced, yes, but clarity had prevailed. And the transformation, I realized, was not just about appearance. It was about asserting existence, claiming space, and living without apology. For the first time, I felt that Lila and I were not just surviving, not just reflecting, not just experimenting. We were thriving. The morning sun poured softly through my curtains, and I felt an unfamiliar ease settle in my chest. For weeks, maybe months, Lila had been emerging quietly, subtly, within the confines of mirrors, reflections, and private moments. But today, there was no hesitation. Today, the world would meet her fully, and I would meet it as her. I dressed with intention, choosing layers that felt like statements of presence, a flowing blouse paired with a delicate scarf, a skirt that allowed movement, and soft leather shoes that clicked confidently against the floor. Every choice was deliberate, every touch against my skin an affirmation. Lila existed now not as a reflection but as an identity, vivid, tangible, undeniably real. The streets welcomed me with their usual hum, but the difference was how I navigated them. I didn't shrink from the glances of strangers. I didn't flinch at the whispered curiosity that trailed me as I passed. Instead, I moved with grace, deliberately, every step an assertion of existence. Lila had learned the rhythm of life, and I followed her lead. At work, the transformation took on new dimensions. Conversations flowed with ease. My gestures, once tentative, now conveyed confidence. Some colleagues still hesitated, caught between old perceptions and new realities, but many adapted, engaging with me in ways that were more authentic, more human. I realized that presence wasn't just about being seen, it was about influencing the space around me, about reshaping expectations without confrontation, about existing fully and unapologetically. The deeper turning point came unexpectedly. I received an invitation from a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone whose opinion mattered, who had seen me in my most guarded, pre-Lila self. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind with soft lighting and private corners. The moment she saw me, her eyes widened, but not with judgment, with recognition, wonder, and something akin to relief. You look incredible," she said, voice soft but steady. "It's really you, isn't it?" I nodded, a warmth blooming in my chest.
Yes.
"It's me. Finally, really me." She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine in a gesture that felt like permission and affirmation combined. "I'm so glad you're being you," she said. And for the first time, I felt the profound power of acknowledgement, not from a mirror, not from private reflection, but from another human being who saw me fully and without reservation. The days that followed were marked by exploration. I experimented with styles, with gestures, with modes of expression I had once considered impossible. Hair accessories, scarves, delicate jewelry, subtle makeup, all became tools of self-discovery rather than performance. Lila was not about adornment for others. She was about alignment, presence, and freedom. Yet, as exhilarating as this was, the world remained unpredictable. A few interactions brought subtle resistance, cautious glances, and whispered assumptions. But each instance was tempered by the knowledge that fear and doubt were temporary, while authenticity was enduring. Lila had taught me that resilience wasn't about avoiding challenge. It was about facing it with clarity, grace, and unwavering self-recognition. One evening, walking home under a canopy of city lights, I paused to watch the reflection of neon signs ripple in puddles. I saw myself in the distorted, glimmering surfaces, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Lila's presence had solidified. She moved through me seamlessly, a force of authenticity that reshaped not just my appearance but my perception, my posture, my very essence. That night, I wrote in my journal, documenting not just the external changes, but the emotional evolution that had accompanied them. I wrote about courage, fear, connection, and self-acceptance. I wrote about the freedom that comes with embracing one's truth fully, even in the face of scrutiny or resistance. And I realized something essential. Lila's journey was not only about transformation, it was about creating a life lived without apology, a life defined by presence, alignment, and self-love. The following week, I met a small group of friends for dinner, people who had witnessed portions of my journey, who had seen Lila emerge gradually and curiously. The evening was a revelation. Conversations flowed freely. Laughter came easily. And in moments of quiet observation, I recognized the profound shift. Lila was no longer confined to mirrors, journals, or private spaces. She existed fully in the world, acknowledged, affirmed, and embraced. For the first time, I felt the fusion of inner and outer worlds. The reflection in the mirror, the whispers in my mind, the presence of Lila, they were no longer separate. They were unified. She had moved from tentative emergence to confident existence, from private exploration to shared reality. And with that unification came a profound sense of peace. The city streets, the cafe lights, the familiar faces, they were no longer obstacles or tests. They were part of a canvas on which Lila could exist, thrive, and unfold. And as I walked home that night, rain streaking softly against the windows, I whispered her name aloud, not as a question, not as a plea, but as an affirmation. Lila, we are here. And we are unstoppable. The week that followed felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about myself. Lila had grown strong, vivid, undeniable, but strength, I discovered, brings with it challenges I hadn't anticipated. A letter arrived one afternoon, crisp and official, inviting me to lead a new project at work. It was a tremendous opportunity, one I had earned through skill and dedication. Yet, the timing felt ironic. It came just as my presence as Lila had begun drawing attention, curiosity, and subtle resistance. I stared at the envelope for minutes, heart racing. Could I step fully into this new role while remaining entirely myself? Could I embrace the visibility this project demanded while honoring the quiet, powerful identity I had cultivated? The questions pressed against my chest with relentless insistence. That evening, I met Daniel at the cafe, where we had once spoken candidly about transformation. I needed perspective, but I also needed affirmation. I got a big opportunity, I admitted, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. It's exciting, but I'm scared. What if showing up as Lila changes how people see me? What if it undermines what I've worked so hard to become? Daniel listened, his gaze steady, patient. Shahzad or Lila, he corrected gently, and the name felt like a bridge connecting past and present, fear and courage. Opportunities test us. They test who we are. But you're not being anyone other than yourself. Lila isn't a mask, you've proven that. If anything, this is the moment to step fully into her, into you. His words struck a chord deep in my chest. I left the cafe feeling a mixture of exhilaration and dread. I was standing on a precipice, the kind that promises both discovery and risk. Lila whispered in my mind, steady, calm, insistent. You are ready. You have always been ready. The days that followed were a flurry of preparation. I organized meetings, outlined strategies, and rehearsed presentations. Yet beneath the logistical details, an emotional undercurrent persisted. Every interaction became a microcosm of choice. How much of Lila to reveal, how fully to assert her presence, how to navigate scrutiny without retreating. Then came the moment of truth. The first meeting of the project team. The room was filled with colleagues I respected, some of whom had witnessed my gradual transformation, others who had only known the pre-Lila version of me. I took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of my pulse, the subtle strength in my posture, the steady certainty in my voice. Thank you all for being here. I began, speaking as Lila and as myself simultaneously. This project is an opportunity for us to collaborate in ways that honor each person's strengths. I want us to be bold, intentional, and authentic in our approach. The room was quiet for a heartbeat, then nods, affirmations, and engaged questions followed. Every interaction felt amplified, as if each word carried the weight of both professional responsibility and personal truth. I realized then that Lila's presence did not diminish my authority, it enhanced it. Her authenticity demanded respect, and in turn, it created a space where I could lead without compromise. The emotional climax came later that week, in a quiet moment alone. I was at home, reviewing notes for the project, when a notification pinged on my phone. A friend I hadn't seen in years had sent a message, asking to meet. There was curiosity in the words, but also hesitation, a question unspoken, a tentative bridge. We met at a park, where autumn leaves painted the ground in gold and crimson. She looked at me for a long moment, eyes wide, then smiled. I barely recognized you, she said softly. But you look happy. Whole. Like yourself. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. I admitted. I've finally allowed myself to exist fully. Her hand brushed mine, a fleeting but profound gesture. I'm glad, she whispered. I'm proud of you. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. Transformation is not just personal. It is relational. It is the way one's presence interacts with others, changes perceptions, fosters empathy, and inspires recognition. Lila was no longer a private reflection, no longer a whispered secret in the dark. She was alive in the world, resonating in subtle gestures, soft smiles, and shared acknowledgement. That night, I stared into the mirror, tracing the contours of her face. Every curve, every softened line, every glimmer of expression told a story of courage, vulnerability, and self-acceptance. And I whispered, softly, resolutely, "We did it, Lila. We're here. And nothing can take that away." The test had been passed, not just in the project, not just in the acknowledgement of friends, but in the affirmation that Lila and I could navigate visibility, scrutiny, and expectation without compromise. The transformation was no longer tentative. It was complete, alive, resilient, and unapologetically real. The morning sunlight spilled through my apartment, warm and golden, painting the walls with the quiet assurance of a new day. For a long time, I had moved through shadows, mirrors, and reflections, exploring the delicate, trembling emergence of Lila. But now, as I stood before the window, I felt her presence in every breath, every heartbeat, every gesture. She wasn't just a part of me. She was me, and I had finally learned how to inhabit her fully. The world no longer felt like a series of tests or judgments. It felt like a canvas, each interaction, each encounter an opportunity to exist authentically. Walking through the streets, I noticed the subtle shifts around me. Smiles lingered a moment longer, greetings carried warmth, and even strangers' eyes held recognition without judgment. It was remarkable how presence alone could ripple into the world, shaping not just perception but experience. Friends, old and new, became witnesses and participants in my journey. Daniel, who had seen the early tremors of change, remained a steady anchor, a reminder that authenticity could coexist with connection. Others who had once hesitated or wondered now approached with curiosity and openness, offering acknowledgement rather than scrutiny. Lila's existence had moved from private reflection to communal reality, and it was beautiful in ways I could never have anticipated. I began exploring spaces I had avoided for years, places where identity was celebrated rather than questioned. Art galleries, cafes, small meetups, all became arenas for self-expression and growth. I experimented with clothing, gestures, and styles not for performance, but for alignment. Hair cascaded freely over my shoulders. Soft fabrics brushed my skin in deliberate comfort. Every accessory, every choice, felt like a note in the symphony of Lila's presence. And yet, the most profound transformation was internal. The mirror had once been a place of tentative exploration, of whispered questions and quiet affirmation. Now it was a sanctuary of recognition. I traced the contours of her face, smiled at the curve of her lips, the gentle line of her jaw, the light that had always been there but had waited for permission to shine. I whispered her name aloud, and it resonated through me like a bell. "Lila, we are here." There were moments of doubt, as there always had been, fleeting shadows at the edge of consciousness, whispers of fear, the weight of past judgments. But they no longer dictated my existence. I had learned to navigate them with grace, to honor them without surrendering to them, to transform vulnerability into strength. The culmination of this journey came unexpectedly, on a quiet evening at the park where the leaves had turned fiery shades of autumn. I was sitting on a bench, watching the wind stir the branches, the sky reflecting pools of gold and violet. A small child approached, curious and unafraid, holding a fallen leaf. They smiled at me, offering the fragile token. I accepted it gently, meeting their gaze with warmth. In that simple gesture, I realized how far I had come. Lila's presence was not just my own. It resonated outward, touching the world in subtle, unassuming ways. It was not about approval, attention, or performance. It was about authenticity, the ability to exist fully, to move through life with integrity, courage, and joy. Later, walking home beneath the soft glow of streetlights, I reflected on the months that had led here. The pill had been the spark, yes, but everything that followed, every reflection, every experiment, every small act of bravery, had shaped the person I had become. Lila was not a fleeting fantasy. She was a culmination of courage, curiosity, patience, and relentless self-recognition. Returning to my apartment, I stood before the mirror one final time, tracing her features as if memorizing them, honoring every line, every curve, every subtle expression. My voice, soft and steady, filled the room. We have arrived. We are real. We are enough. And in that moment, I understood that transformation is not just about change, it is about alignment. It is about embracing every part of oneself with compassion and courage. It is about moving through the world fully, unapologetically, and with joy. Lila had emerged from reflection into reality, from tentative exploration into complete presence. And I, finally, had learned how to exist fully, not as someone else, not as a version I had once feared, but as the truest, most authentic version of myself. The journey had been long, uncertain, and sometimes frightening. But it had led me here, to clarity, to peace, to the quiet thrill of authenticity. I was no longer hiding, no longer questioning, no longer fragmented. I was Lila, and Lila was home.